In Dungeons & Dragons, the power cap that any adventurer can achieve is very straightforward. You can basically make it to level 20, which essentially transforms you into a legendary hero whose power can echo throughout an entire realm. A level 20 player character is so strong that most people will know your name. Evil villains will fear you and will attempt to hide from you, and your stories will be written down on books that scholars will read for hundreds of years. You will have the ears of kings and queens, and gods will open their gates to their realms and beckon you forth when you die. This is the epitome of what a player character can achieve. But what if you aspired for more? What if you wanted to become a god? What if you wanted to destroy a god? These are the types of questions that are not answered in any of the 5th edition books, but instead you have to go all the way back to 3rd and sometimes even 2nd edition to get some of these answers. Answers that do exist, by the way. And this is going to be the beginning of a small series of videos that I will be doing on deities. Today we will talk about how gods are made, what they need to exist, and how they can be destroyed. In our next video we will talk about how powerful can a god become, what are their abilities and resistances, and how does a godly avatar exactly work. And then in the last video of the trilogy we will talk about the single strongest god in Dungeons & Dragons and what can that deity do that others cannot. To start off, know that gods are divided into multiple different ranks, and these ranks differentiate the level of worship that these powers possess and what is the level of strength that they have. You have greater powers, intermediate powers, lesser powers, and then demi-powers. What's particularly interesting about the way it works in Dungeons & Dragons is that these ranks are strictly defined by how many followers a deity has, but also by the fervor of each of the followers. This is very important to know because it explains how can evil gods of death and decay can have so much power even though they don't really have massive churches and widespread support from the vast majority of people. They possess great power because of the incredible fervor that their followers show. To top it off, these rankings can be influenced greatly, albeit temporarily, by use of powerful worship ceremonies or artifacts. So every time a paladin of Tyr, god of justice, brings justice to an evil villain, Tyr's gonna get a massive spike to its power level. But same thing applies every time a cultist sacrifices an innocent to Baal, god of murder. This is why you always see those darn cultists doing dark ceremonies and sacrificing people to their dark gods. They have to because their dark gods don't have a lot of followers, so they instead rely on strong fervor and ceremonies to keep up with the other deities. But in essence, the more followers they have and the more devout they are, the stronger the deity will be. All things being equal, a demigod typically carries around a few hundred to a few thousand followers. A lesser deity will have somewhere between a few thousand to tens of thousands. Intermediate powers will have hundreds of thousands, while greater powers will have millions of followers. Things, however, of course, are never equal. Not every follower grants the same amount of power to the deity, and when push comes to shove, not even the deities truly know the divine algorithm that goes behind all of this. To make this even more interesting, deities have very specific portfolios that define the topics, things, ideas, or emotions that the deity has power over. Talos, god of storms and destruction, has the portfolio of storms, forest fires, earthquakes, tornadoes, and general destruction. So when it comes to these things, he's particularly good at it, and when his followers do these things, Talos becomes stronger. Every god has a portfolio, and it is the duty of the god to regulate and command over its dominion. If a god were to kill another god, then the victorious deity simply takes over the portfolio and followers of the loser, of course, becoming stronger. The reason these killings don't happen as often as you would imagine, though, is because knowing that this is a possibility, many deities actually seek to form mini pantheons or groups in order to seek power in numbers. Talos, for example, leads the gods of fury, which is a collective term for destructive deities like Errol, who commands winter, Malor, who commands hunts, and Umberlee, who commands the sea. Talos is a great power, Umberlee is an intermediate, while both Malor and Auril are both lesser powers. Talos is there to protect the rest of this group, but he doesn't do it out of the kindness of his heart. He does it because all of them give Talos divine payment in the form of extra followers and sometimes in the form of a straight up divine tax, where they give him some of their divine power in exchange for safety. See, Umberlee is powerful, but if she wasn't protected, then any greater deity that would like to have the sea in their portfolio could go on and try to take her out, and most likely succeed. It is a God-eat-God world out there, and everyone wants to become a greater deity, and they will do whatever it takes to get there. And that's because the difference between a greater power and an intermediate power is actually huge. For one, typically a deity can only be killed by a power that is of the same level or higher. Umberlee, for example, could never kill Talos. If she tried, Talos would literally just reappear. There is a major power discrepancy, yeah, and I mean major, but it is more about there being a straight-up divine law about this. If a deity of lower rank tries to kill one of higher rank, the higher rank deity will simply just spawn back again. This applies to all ranks except for demigod, of course, which are the lowest. Deities can also only be permanently killed whilst in their own domain, but it is also there where they are at their strongest. Their magics tend to be maximized while in their own personal plane, and most deities also possess a plethora of divine guardians and monsters that protect them from attack. That being said, the power discrepancy between a higher rank god and any particular deity is so big that it typically only takes a lot of time for preparation and a willingness to spend a lot of resources for that higher rank deity to kill one of lower rank, provided that the lower rank god, of course, does not possess outside help. Whereas when it comes to two gods of the same rank duking it out, the winner would require assistance from other powers, a lot of high-powered mortals, especially designed ceremonies and spells, artifacts, or all of the above in order to win. It is not impossible, however, for some of these divine protections to be circumvented, but they would be the exception to the rule. For example, a couple of videos ago we talked about the Jathman Dagger, a magical artifact whose power allowed for the slaying of gods. Its special property being the ability to remove divine protections and manipulating the fate of divine beings. With this dagger, you could theoretically fully kill a god, even as a mortal, something that you, of course, normally cannot do. So far we have talked mostly about gods fighting gods, but what about mortals fighting gods? Frankly, it is described to us in the lore that there's just plain isn't a way for a mortal to truly fight a deity of lesser rank and above. The disparity in power is just unreal. We are never given a blanket challenge rating for a god, but based on the lore, we can figure out that the overall average fighting level of a god, without any divine properties or protections, range between CR 40 to CR 60. We know this because there is a CR 56 Titan that can slay any god one-on-one. It's not just that he can, but he actually did kill dozens of gods. If you're interested in hearing about that, I would recommend you check out my video on the single strongest monster of all time. Now the problem though is that it's not just that you would have to deal with a possibly CR 40 or CR 50 creature, but the divine protections and divine abilities that come with being a divine. Divine abilities that are mostly there to deal with mortals, which is the greatest strength that a god has. Gods can basically do almost anything that they want to mortals if they are higher rank enough. Some of them can literally just kill you by thinking about killing you. We're actually going to talk about the specific divine powers granted to each of the ranks in our next video. Alas, the only type of power that mortals have any chance of challenging are demi-powers. Not just because they are the weaker deities, but because most demi-powers have their domains in the prime material plane instead of the outer planes. This makes them not just easier to access by mortals, but if the mortals had a particular way to kill the deity, like the Jathman Dagger, then killing the deity would be permanent, since, again, you can only permanently kill them in their home plane. There are also other reasons, most of which I hope to talk about on the next video, but to give you a taste, demi-powers need to use spells or items to teleport, unlike the rest of the deities, which can just innately do so, which means you can counterspell demi-powers and prevent them from running. Demi-powers can also only summon a single avatar per year, which means you only have to deal with one avatar before you can challenge the real boss. Other deities can summon dozens, if not hundreds, depending on the rank, which makes them hilariously impossible to defeat. Now, the last way in which a god can die is through neglect. Quote, "Deities need the power provided them by worship to exist. One way for a power to die is for it to have no more worshippers. To intentionally cause a power's death through this method is difficult even for most greater powers. Basically, all the worshippers of a deity have to die, or the power has to gradually lose worshippers so slowly that it does not realize its inevitable fate until it can do little to stop it. Powers can hang on as demi-powers as long as they have even one worshipper, and even after they lose that worshipper, it takes them a while to wither away while they wring the last bits of deific sustenance from the use of their name, their sovereignty over the principles and ideals of their portfolio, and even the awe inspired by tales about them as myth or parables. During this time, they would make every effort to get anyone to worship them. To effectively ensure the death of such a deity at that point, in all likelihood, it would have to be imprisoned on its home plane and rendered unable to communicate with any mortal being. Eventually then, he would die." End quote. Now, when a power actually dies, it is magically transported to the astral plane for it to float for all eternity. This is why when you travel in the astral plane, you do see a lot of these enormous corpses of incredible creatures just floating petrified. Quote, "The power itself drifts helplessly in the silver void of the astral, occasionally stirring as if in slumber, but never reawakening." End quote. See, a deity is never truly dead, even in death. Just how a mortal can be resurrected, technically so can a god, but it is of course much more convoluted and complicated for a deity to be able to come back. Quote, "In order to live again as a deity, a power must be worshipped and cannot have been utterly destroyed. Then something must be done to suddenly and massively direct a great deal of worship power into the deity. This involves a prolonged ritual in which the dead power's name is repeatedly invoked. Often massive quantities of offerings of the type most favored by the power are also made, and sometimes artifacts are used to somehow direct the power generated by the ceremony more efficiently into the deity." End quote. Any resurrected deity brought back in this fashion always comes back as a demi-power, and then it is up to the power to accumulate enough power to bring itself back up to whatever power it used to have. Typically, they also only receive the bare essentials of the portfolios they used to have, having more than likely lost many of their domains in death. Now, I don't have to tell you, of course, that if a deity is dead, priests and paladins or druids that got spells from it will no longer get it. Also, even though a dead deity is never truly dead, it is effectively dead in the sense that it cannot feel anything, it cannot sense anything or do anything. Vestiges are something very different, which we might talk about at some other point. The only thing a dead god can actually ever sense is, quote, "the speaking of its name during a ceremony to attempt to restore it to life." End quote. Silently, ponderously, they float through the astral plane, mammoth isles of rock adrift in an endless sea of silver. Once they were gods, now they are little more than debris, petrified husks of fading belief and forgotten prayer. Yet for many, their memories linger, their dreams live on, and for some, those dreams are terrifying nightmares of vengeance and conquest and death. Oof, I was about to end the video, I almost forgot. So how can a hero become a god? As you can imagine, most direct ways are not told to us in the lore, but we're actually given the bare minimum of what is required in order to be able to achieve it. Usually the process involves a combination of things: the accumulation of power, the use of arcane rituals, the use of artifacts, the sponsorship of an already established power, or some combination of these. In raw game terms, quote, "In order to even attempt to ascend into godhood, a mortal in the Forgotten Realms setting should have achieved at least level 25, have one attribute score of 25 or above, and have another attribute score of at least 19. She or he must then spend a great deal of time researching methods to attain divinity, come up with a plan for doing so, and confront great peril in order to execute that plan. The plan must always involve at least two of these three things: the performance of a specially researched ceremony or spell of elaborate complexity, great cost, and great personal danger, the use of an artifact, or the sponsorship of a deity." End quote. When all of this is done, then it all comes down to whether or not Ao, the Overlord, accepts your entry into divinity. Ao is the god of gods. He is the hidden one, the divine that makes all the decisions in the background. He is, of course, the subject of the third video on this series, but know that he and he alone gets to decide who becomes a god, and he alone has the power to remove that power from you at his command. Quote, often in attempts to attain divine status through power rituals or the use of artifacts, failure, in the form of a tacit no from Eo, results in the mortal becoming a lich, being transformed into some other odd form of undead creature, or being totally destroyed. Usually if a divine power is involved in some form of sponsorship of a candidate before Eo, a rejection means that the mortal either continues on in life, hoping to overcome whatever the cause of Eo's rejection was and to be given a second chance, or passes on into the afterlife to become a powerful servant of the sponsoring deity in the outer planes. Eo is never obliged to explain his decisions. End quote. Guys, thank you so much for watching. I would like to personally thank my Patreon supporters, Walker Motley, Zach Bowell, Rukato Fan, Barry Maskant, 5E Magic Shop, Daniel Umar, Rusty Rain, Morgan Johnson, Biotechnofrag, Daniel Luna, Doc Feeder, Brad Salazar, The Great Codini, Terry Culp, Baracus Law, Omega Scales, Karathas The Bulwark, Ozol, Soundtech, Siri, Alex Cookson, Square Chicken, Ariel Nelson, Benjamin Bosters, IO is Awesome, Falky951, Jacob Krazid, Griffin Pierce, and Xeran King for supporting me on Patreon at the $25 level. If you would like to support me as well, then please head on over to patreon.com/Mr. Rex to support. Guys, once again, I would like to just thank you so much for helping every single one of you who watched the video, every single one of you who comments and likes the video, and of course, especially to those of you that helped me out on Patreon. Just YouTube is going through a very harsh period right now with the coronavirus. Commercials aren't really worth much. Videos are not really worth much, even though views overall across the board tend to be bigger because most people are watching videos nowadays. And the actual commercials are not worth much. So the channel it's currently, you know, things are rough. As it is, I would imagine, for a lot of YouTubers out there. So I really want to take this time to appreciate every single one of you who support me through all of the methods that I've mentioned just before. So just for a third time now, thank you once again for watching. I say it literally every video 3 times. Thank you for watching. But with that said, I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.